Hi everyone, today we're going to debrief the motion set at Chapman's for the quarterfinal, which reads, "This house would save the child over your wife." The info site for this motion is pretty detailed, so I'm not going to read it out loud. However, it will be attached in the description for this video. I want to point out, before we get into the analysis of arguments and clashes, that this is primarily an actor motion that is being debated from the perspective of the husband in question. Therefore, arguments that have overarching ethics along the lines of, oh, you ought to probably save the child because it has far more of its life ahead of it, rather than your wife who is already who has already lived a substantial portion of her life, are far less relevant than arguments concerning benefits and harms to the actor himself, which is the husband in question. Therefore, I would stay away from making such arguments because it is hard to weigh why they win you the debate as opposed to arguments relating to harms and benefits to the actor. That being said, let's get into the proposition. The big argument I think you ought to make on proposition for this motion is what your life looks like after you choose to not save the child, i.e., you make an argument concerning why the comparative on opposition is so much worse. The argument is as follows. It is that resentment builds up between you and your wife for a couple of reasons. First, your wife has made her decision/choice explicitly clear that she wants the child saved over her. If you choose to not save the child, you are disrespecting the one thing she has always wanted, which is the strong desire to have children, and that is an irreversible decision that you cannot really fix. The second is that her choice is influenced by strong narratives surrounding the legacy that you leave behind when you have kids. The fact that motherhood is a rewarding experience, but not just motherhood, but simply the existence of a child that has come from you, from your womb, is important to a lot of people. And that being taken away from you by someone who you hold very close to you can potentially break up your marriage. Thirdly, you also have a strong desire to have children, as detailed in the info slide. Therefore, the fact that you had to save your wife and pick between this thing you have wanted for a really, really long time means that subconsciously you may view your wife as the one who took it away from you, and resentment builds on your end. The reason this is a debate-winning argument is that you make the analysis that losing each child is already an incredibly traumatic experience, and one you have been through before, which makes it worse because you had to go through the same thing twice. Therefore, dealing with this, as well as your marriage falling apart, is a loss that is twofold to you as a person and can lead to horrible issues down the line, such as depression. The comparative argument you make is that if you choose to save the kid, it means that you have someone to help you get through the grief of your wife as they grow up, but also it means that there's some catharsis if you save the kid, because there's a memoir of your wife that you have every day. You know this is something that she wanted, and it feels like you have made the right decision. And I think this is the big argument you make on proposition. What can you make on opposition? I think you can make a variety of arguments here that are quite nuanced. The first is, it is very clear that you love your wife, because the info site says you have been in a committed marriage, and the fact that you have chosen to have kids with her tells you that you do love your wife and you do trust her in building a future together. Fundamentally, the argument you make is that you will probably have loved your wife more at the point at which you make this decision than you do love this child, simply off the basis that you have more lived experiences with your wife rather. You have gone through a majority, or rather a substantial portion of your life with her. And at some point, if you view your kid as the thing that took your wife away from you, it is hard to love that child. And resentment builds up on that end, and you live a pretty uncomfortable life. And the same issues such as depression that proposition claims fester on your side actually occurs on their side. Another argument you can make on opposition is that family and friends and people who are close to you also start to resent you because they view you as a person who took your wife, who is someone they loved, away from them. Obviously, this isn't your immediate family like your father or your mother, but this is also your mother-in-law, your mutual friends, and your wife's side of the family. The way you nuance this argument is by saying it is already hard to raise your kids as a single father, because concepts such as maternal leave aren't popular or enforced in many countries. The fact that your support system drastically reduces at the same time as well means it's much harder for you to give this kid the life that he or she or they deserve. There's also some mitigation that you can make in the form of an argument towards proposition, and that is A, your wife is clearly unfit and has been declared unfit to make major life decisions. She's going through intense physical trauma, and that changes the mental state and well being of a person. Therefore, what she wants right now may not be what she wants in the future. Additionally, your wife may want to have children off the basis that she wants to be a mother, i.e., she appreciates the concept of motherhood and wants it to be a part of her life. But that is not something she can experience if you make this decision to choose the kid and your wife dies, which means that your wife may actually have changed her mind down the line if you choose to have saved her over the kid, and you can have a happy marriage. And in fact, you weigh that you, on like a balance of probabilities, are more likely to have a happier marriage than the argument that proposition is making. The second is the alternative you have on your side of the house is adoption, which means you can still raise a kid. Sure, it may not be your own, but you can make arguments and analysis as to how you can love kids, these children, as your own, how many couples have had successful adoptions, because oftentimes it's not just having your own biological children that people care about. It's also experiences and concepts such as fatherhood and motherhood, things that you have through adoption. The reason I say this is mitigation is obviously you cannot make the argument that it is the same as having biological children. Otherwise, this couple would not have tried so hard for biological children, given that they have had issues in the past. However, you can offer an alternative to the strong desire to have children, but proposition cannot offer an alternative to having this your wife who you are married to. Sure, they can make the argument that you can marry someone later down the line, but obviously the infocide doesn't say that there's a strong preference for that, or whether you would like that or want that. And it's very easy for you to argue that you wouldn't, or you wouldn't be able to get through this trauma. So even though the proposition arguments at times about how your marriage falls apart seems hard to respond, it's quite easy to do so once you're able to present alternatives or question the fact, or question whether or not this is actually what your wife wants. Central clashes in the debate. I think what this will boil down to is twofold. The first is what your life looks like with your wife on opposition. And I think this will be contested by both teams. Proposition is again going to make the argument that your wife begins to resent you and your marriage falls apart. On opposition, you can make the argument that your wife is unfit to make these decisions and her mind will change down the line. So the tiebreaker, I think, for this on opposition is everything I said earlier, which is you try to argue that this is not actually what your wife wants and she's going through extreme circumstances while making this decision. On proposition, I think it is also easy to make the weighing that this is an explicit decision that she has been clear about before she went into a medical crisis, i.e. the rationale behind her making this decision while she was having like a crisis during her pregnancy doesn't change on either side, which is she still has a strong desire to have her own biological children. She's still like influenced by narratives surrounding leaving a legacy in this world by having children, and that doesn't change, and as a result your wife hates you. So it is easy to rather tie break or weigh these clashes for both sides depending on how the debate plays out. The second clash that I think some teams just may not explore in this debate is what life looks like when you raise this child, because your ability to raise this child and how like strenuous it is on your mental as well as physical health is also a massive part of this debate. So on proposition, the way you would get about this clash is by making arguments about how people feel sympathetic towards you, they're more than willing to help you, how laws are changing, you can still apply for things like paternal leave if you have like documented proof that your wife has passed away giving birth. There are benefits the state offers to single parents, and as a result, this makes this job slightly easier than opposition portrays. On opposition, you tie back in your argument about the fact that your family and friends might have cut you off, and the fact that you may not have a support system to look after this child. Something interesting you can explore on opposition or even on proposition on this clash is how your child views you. Because on opposition, you can talk about the fact that this child, if you cannot raise her to the best extent or spend time with her because you had to work like multiple jobs in order to send her to school, clothe, feed her, pay for your rent, will sort of resent you and wish that her mother was alive. And the fact that you made this choice, even though she's alive, there's an irrational resentment that builds up. On proposition, you make the argument that your child, as they grow older, realizes the sacrifice that you had to make for them. The fact that you do not have a wife and like your child does not have a mother is sort of a bonding experience in terms of loss, and that helps both of you cope better. So I think that is an interesting bit of weighing that I would have explored if I were in this debate in like the latter speeches, preferably thirds or even seconds, just because it is interesting new analysis that adds to the debate and it adds value to the clashes. That's about it. I hope this was helpful to everyone who listened, and have a great day.